Good morning and welcome to the CAVE webinar. Today we are looking at the chain of infection, a reservoir of organisms with Pete Tyson, Commercial Director at Water Hygiene Centre. My name is Laura and I'm the Associate Director here at CAVE, and I'll be acting as moderators for this morning's session. We strive to create interactive webinars and we encourage you to submit any questions you have. These questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. We will get through as many as possible, but if we do run out of time, we will collect any questions and send the answers out in due course. If you're watching us live, you can use the side panel to send in your questions. Alternatively, you can get in touch with us at webinars@cbld.com.
Well, if he's moved today, there's no point going down tonight, then be settled in, right? It's what I would say.
On mute, please.
And yeah, and then I'll do tomorrow night, sure, like then if necessary, like. Do you know what I mean?
So before I pass over to Pete, let me just tell you a little bit about him. Pete has extensive experience with water systems and waterborne pathogens. With 20 years in the water treatment hygiene industry, Pete has worked as a service engineer, sales engineer, regional manager and regional director for some major water hygiene companies. His experience is gleaned from being involved in the Legionella outbreak in 2002 at Barrow, Cumbria, to managing contracts at nuclear power stations to presenting role of the reasonable persons training. His experience and knowledge of specific areas bridges many market sectors. Pete was co-author of an article published for the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health discussing COVID-19 return to work and the actions to be undertaken on businesses reopen. So if you give me a couple of seconds, I'll hand over to Pete and he will begin shortly.
Brilliant, thank you. Just try and share. Okay, so we should be able to see the chain of infection reservoir of organisms presentation. It's highlighted in red, so fingers crossed. Thank you very much for attending, much appreciated. And I suppose with the title, we'll try to identify who is part of the chain of infection and what the reservoir of organisms might be. We're all familiar with TBCs, Legionella, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and there are other waterborne pathogens becoming more interesting, Cuprividis poikilis, for example. And I suppose what we need to do is really start from scratch as to where these organisms are found, and how they start to become an issue for us within a healthcare environment. Or any environment in particular. So, chain of infection, a HAA, healthcare associated infection, or a HAI, a hospital-acquired infection. And these are, for clarity, these are the same sort of interchangeable term for nosocomial infection. So, a nosocomial infection is a hospital-acquired infection or a healthcare associated infection. And as I mentioned before, the title being chain of infection reservoir of organisms. And it's worthy of note that the World Health Organization details almost 2 billion people depend on healthcare facilities with no water. And worldwide, there's 1 in 4 healthcare facilities that has got no water services. 1 in 3 does not have access to hand hygiene where care is provided. And 1 in 10 has no sanitation services. 1 in 3 does not segregate water safely. And in the world's 47 least developed countries, there's 1 in 2 healthcare facilities that does not have basic drinking water. 1 in 4 healthcare facilities have no hand hygiene facilities at point of care, and 3 in 5 lack basic sanitation services. So with this in mind, what is an infection? So you guys can all read, I'm pretty sure of it, but a nosocomial infection, also called a hospital-acquired infection, can be defined as an infection acquired in hospital by a patient who was admitted for a reason other than that infection. An infection occurring in a patient in hospital or health care facility in whom the infection was not present or incubating at the time of admission. This includes infections acquired in hospital but appearing after discharge, and also occupational infections among staff of the facility. So the World Health Organization in 2016 issued guidelines on core components of infection prevention and control programs at the national and acute healthcare facility level. And in the report, it states that healthcare-associated infections are one of the most common adverse events in care delivery and are an endemic burden, coupled with epidemics, i.e. the coronavirus, and major public health problems. So sticking with the hospital-acquired infection, how much of a problem are they? In May 2011, World Health Organization issued a report on the burden of endemic healthcare-associated infection worldwide, and that was summarised in the World Health Organization fact sheet. And these being, of every 100 hospitalised patients at any given time, 7 in developed and 10 in developing countries will acquire at least one healthcare-associated infection. At any given time, the prevalence of a healthcare-acquired infection in developed countries varies between 3.5% and 12%. The European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control estimates that 4 million patients are affected by approximately 4.5 million episodes of healthcare-acquired infection every year. And approximately 30% of patients in ICUs are affected by at least one episode of HAI, and the longer the patient stays in an ICU, the more at risk they become of acquiring an infection. High frequency of infection is associated with the use of invasive devices, in particular central lines, urinary catheters and ventilators, particularly in relation to Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Okay, so for an infection to occur, there needs to be the presence of microorganism, there needs to be immunocompromised patients, and there needs to be some form of transmission. So over the next few slides, we'll take a look at each of these contributing factors. We're going to start with immunocompromised patients. And it's fair to say that we do know a little about types of patients and their susceptibility. So immunocompromised patients, healthy people may develop Legionella disease. There are several factors that increase susceptibility, and they are newborn, neonates, those with increasing age greater than 50 years of age. Men, approximately 3 times more likely than women. There's no physiological reason why to suggest that is the case, but the factors are the fact is there is the 3-to-1 ratio, and that ratio is more or less due to exposure. And the people who have been exposed to Legionella disease in historical data since 1976 onwards, when Legionella was first identified, have historically been males. Have been in the work area where those towers, etc., have been sited. And as I said, there's no physiological reason. The only sort of thing that could suggest that there's a slight way of analysing that is that females have got a 0.4% greater immune system than males, according to a paper that's over in the States, a white paper that's printed in the States, but it doesn't give us that ratio of 3-to-1. So the suggestion used to be that males have got bigger lungs, have got larger lung capacity, they breathe in more, etc., etc., etc. Well, that was found to be a falsism, and the Barrow outbreak in 2002 debunked that myth, and it was about exposure. So there's a ratio between people who were in the town centre, and within the town centre there was a 7-to-1 ratio from females to males, and the contraction rate was 7-to-1 between females to males at the Barrow outbreak. So it debunked that myth of males are more susceptible. There's no physiological reason, it's just about exposure. Okay, so we've also got existing respiratory disease that makes the lungs more vulnerable to infection. We've got illnesses and underlying health conditions, cancer, diabetes, kidney disease, or alcoholism, for example. And smoking, heavy cigarette smoking, probability of impaired lung function, and patients who are immunocompromised as a result of illness or treatment, those on immunosuppressant drugs to inhibit the body's natural defences. Okay, so we've known that Legionella has been around for about 40 years. And there's a lot of other things that have reared their ugly head in recent years. This is Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Obviously, we take some samples now from augmented care facilities, etc. There's, as I said before, Cuprivardis, and I suppose some of the things that we've got to take into consideration is the immunocompromised patients and what it is that's actually contributing to their immunocompromisation. So, as we've said there, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2016, any underlying condition. This is data from the Public Health England showing that relation between people who caught Legionella disease and underlying conditions that they had. So looking at any underlying condition, 2/3 of people who caught Legionella disease had something wrong with them. 33% were smokers, 29% had heart conditions, and 15% had diabetes. In 2012, an outbreak of Legionella disease in Edinburgh, 56 confirmed cases and 36 probable and possible cases linked to this outbreak. 4 deaths were reported amongst the confirmed cases, and a report on the outbreak detailing underlying conditions among the confirmed cases gave us the following data. 70% had a serious underlying medical condition, 25% had a condition or were on treatment that was likely to result in immunosuppression, 16% were diabetic, 79% were reported to be current smokers, compared with 19% in the overall Lothian population, and 9% were reported to have excess alcohol consumption based on a clinical assessment of alcohol consumption greater than 21 units per week for males and 14 units for females. Okay, so now let's consider another waterborne pathogen, that Pseudomonas aeruginosa that I just talked about. HTMO401 details those in augmented care are the most susceptible, and there is no fixed definition of augmented care. Most care that is designated as augmented will be that where medical nursing procedures render the patient susceptible to invasive disease from environmental and opportunistic pathogens such as Pseudomonas aeruginosa and other organisms. So broadly they include the following areas: critical care, adult paediatric and neonates, renal, respiratory including cystic fibrosis, and ICU and ITU areas. And the Public Health England issue an annual data report on Pseudomonas aeruginosa. And the last updated report, issued in December 2020, had data extracted from Public Health England's data capture system on 23rd of June 2020, and data reported for 146 acute trusts on 191 CCGs, and the annual accounts and rates being 2017 to 2018, 4,305. 2018 to 2019, 4,186, and 2019 to 2020, 4,336. And I've just considered 2 types of waterborne pathogens, Legionella and Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and we can already determine those susceptible to those pathogens and how they could be infected, for example. And as noted at the beginning, 30% of ICU patients will pick up an HAI, hospital-acquired infection. Now let's think about the transmission of pathogens. So how does it get around? And how do people come into contact with these pathogens? And the pathogens need to be transmitted. So in 2011, there was a World Health Organization report identifying the following transmission pathways: ingestion, inhalation, aspiration, and contact. So HTMO4, the Pseudomonas aeruginosa, provides a steer on the transmission and contact. So first being direct contact, ingestion, bathing, contact with mucous membranes or surgical site, and splashing from water outlets or basins when outlet is run, for example. And the splashing element is a real hot topic at present, with many studies being carried out by various agencies and bodies such as Public Health England. And these studies continue, but with splashing, what is in the drain or end of the tap can be propelled through the air and land outside the basin area and onto a person, be it staff, visitor or patient. So therefore we have contact. And this is demonstrated with the image on the right hand side there, where the water has been injected with fluorescence or a UV dye, a fluorescence dye which is detectable under UV. And as you can see, the splash within the basin, looking in front of the basin, you can see a few splashes. Splashes travel. Public Health England have shown that these splashes can travel up to 2 meters from the basin. Okay, so the second being indirect contact. Yeah, and this could be inhalation of aerosols within the room. This could be inhalation of aerosols from respiratory equipment, devices that produce an aerosol, or an open suction of wound irrigation, for example. We could have medical devices, equipment rinsed with contaminated water. Yeah, we could have washing of hands in contaminated water from services or from contaminated equipment. Reusable wash bowls, for example. Retrograde contamination from a patient to an outlet, then to next patient in the next room. Or cleanliness of tools and equipment of those who install, fit, maintain the water fittings, for example. I'm pretty sure that plumbers in general who aren't aware of microbiological issues don't regularly disinfect their tools, their pieces of kit, the equipment that they're working on. I've seen many in hospital environment where that is the case. And it should be written into some of the method statements and how we do repairs. And some of the in-house staff, for example, should be undertaking that task as well to again ensure that indirect contact is not achieved. Okay, so the final element we've got linking the chain of infection is presence of microorganisms in hospital environment. And we saw the slide just a moment ago from the World Health Organization in 2011. We can now see the rest of the detail. The bacteria such as E. coli, Legionella and Mycobacterium, and since 2011 we've added a few more. And the Pseudomonas aeruginosa from 2012 outbreak within the Belfast Trust, and Cuprivardis in recent years from Glasgow. And a little background on the Cuprivardis Glasgow Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, which opened in June 2015. And very early on, there were concerns about infections emerging in the patients. And they had an inquiry which was commissioned in 2020, June 2020, and the report runs to 227 pages with 63 recommendations. And some of the findings that are the governance of the project during design, build, commissioning and maintenance did not adequately take account of the scale and complexity and specialist nature of the building project. And the project would have benefited from greater external expertise and greater uptake of internally available expertise to support decision-making on the water and air ventilation systems at key points in the design, build and commissioning phases. And some of the difficulties encountered with water and ventilation systems were the result of ambiguity concerning the status and interpretation of guidance. So one of the things that the industry has taken a hold of, and thankfully the Water Hygiene Centre was one of the sort of the instigators of this aspect, which was the design review. And this is going back a number of years now, that the design reviews should be sent across the water safety group within the organisation, should be sent across the estates department, and should be sent across the authorising engineer to review what the proposal or what the proposed installation is going to look like. Does it conform to the current standards? Is it mitigating and minimising the risks going further forward? And have we taken a look at it from a general maintenance management perspective? And these project water safety groups and the water safety group and the architects, the design houses, they should be getting their heads together at the early stages of development, at the design stage, to ensure that the whole process is as well managed as it possibly can before it gets to the point where there's a spade in the ground and we start installing equipment that's not fit for purpose or doesn't conform to current guidelines and recommendations. And these are slowly starting to filter through to all levels within the care facility. Okay, organisms, natural environment. Okay, so COSH tells us that the control of substances hazardous to health, we've got to look first to eliminate those substances that are hazardous to health. And can we remove water from, or can we remove the bacteria from our flora and fauna? Of course we can't. Can we remove our existing water system installations? Not achievable. So from a hierarchy of controls, we can't eliminate. So therefore we must try and engineer as best possible to reduce the risk. And subsequently, once we've engineered it to reduce the risk and mitigate the risk as much as possible, we then talk about control and managing that risk. So as such, to comply with COSH, there is a need to control these substances that are hazardous to health, because Legionella disease does come under COSH, comes under biological agent. We don't necessarily complete a COSH assessment for it, but indirectly we do exactly what COSH is asking us to do, which is to do a Legionella risk assessment, have a management plan in place, explain to employees what's going on, keep records, and have a planning management plan. Okay, so presence of microorganisms in our hospital environment. Okay, so let's think about where these microorganisms may be present, or our reservoir of organisms. So Legionella is a naturally occurring ubiquitous organism found in natural watercourses, rivers, lakes, reservoirs, streams, etc., etc. So starting at the very beginning, our main cold water supply is not sterile. Yeah, it's not sent to us in a sterile environment. It's disinfected or it's chlorinated.
Hello, yes, I'm just trying to find Pete. I don't know what's happened there. Just bear with me, please.
Hello.
Hi, Pete. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Please carry on.
Okay. Did you miss anything, or have I?
You think you were back a couple of slides?
Back a couple of slides.
About a
This
minute,
one?
yeah. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, sorry about that, folks. Yeah, so organisms naturally found in our environment. From a cost perspective, we've got to control substances that are hazardous to health. We've first got to try to eliminate those substances that are hazardous to health. We can't remove Legionella and other waterborne pathogens from our flora and fauna. We can't eliminate water from our supplies, from existing water systems, which is not achievable, and as such, therefore, we need to control them. So we try and engineer them as best possible, again through that design phase and through engineering improvements, removing dead legs, removing storage capacity where possible, and basically eliminating the potential places where Legionella and other waterborne pathogens can grow and live. And we have to do this because it's under COSH, Control of Substance Hazard to Health. Legionella comes under biological agent. And yeah, therefore, but we don't necessarily do a COSH assessment for it. But what we do is we do exactly what COSH is asking us to do. Indirectly, we do a Legionella risk assessment. We have competent trained personnel involved. We put a management plan in place. We keep records, and we've got a responsibility for our staff and subcontractors and surrounding environment. Okay, so now let's think about where the microorganisms may be present from our reservoir or our reservoir of organisms. And starting at the very beginning, as I mentioned before, it's a ubiquitous organism. It's a naturally occurring organism found naturally in rivers, lakes, reservoirs, streams, ponds. And unfortunately, our water supply system is not a sterile environment. It's not sent to us as sterile water. So therefore, unfortunately, it can be a very potential source for microorganisms to be present in our supply lines, because the main cold water distribution system is not free from dead legs or dead ends, biofilms or cracks. So therefore, contamination can occur. And once it gets into our property, it becomes our responsibility to manage and to prevent the proliferation of further microorganisms. So what might we have within our buildings? We may have cold water storage tanks. We may have hot water systems, generators, for example, and we will probably have a distribution system. So in all of these locations, there is a potential for waterborne pathogens to live and to grow and create contamination. And a few examples of what issues may exist with these systems. So let's say we have some cold water storage tanks that are oversized. So there's a poor turnover, they are poorly configured, they're therefore gaining heat. We've got some hot water generators that may be undersized, so not achieving temperatures, not set at the right temperatures, they might be poorly configured. And our distribution system, it may have blind ends, dead legs, little used outlets, poorly configured, gaining heat due to a lack of insulation, for example. The hot water may sit beneath the cold water pipes and supply lines. and there may be other things in there like dead birds, whatever else, some other form of contamination. And we've probably seen a lot of these locations on the bottom right hand side, which is a little used outlet. And we're going to class that as a little used outlet because we don't feel as though this room, or that's going to be a little used outlet especially, because we don't feel as though this room is often used. And we do see this on a regular basis, as you can imagine. So now let's get to the outlet. So a few examples of what issues may exist at the outlet. So Pseudomonas aeruginosa is in big debates about whether it's a systemic issue or whether it can be found at 2 meters from supply. And I believe it can be both. So I think it does form at the contamination can occur at the outlet itself. But I do believe that the system can be systemically contaminated as well. So TMV blends hot and cold water to make it a safe temperature. Where there are multiple TMVs, then we are allowing more components with a low temperature of hot water to be a potential source. Thermostatic mixing valves can mix temperatures to 38 to 44 degrees centigrade, and the proliferation rate for Legionella bacteria, it grows the fastest at 37 body temperature, and 38 degrees C is not too far away from that, so it's a potential area where Legionella bacteria can form. But as you can see on these photographs, there's a lot of areas within these systems that biofilm can form, and biofilm can therefore harbour or any other waterborne pathogen, amoeba, Legionella bacteria, etc., can all be in there. And we've just highlighted a drain, and where water does not flow free down the drain, this can splash back and cause a biofilm to develop, an efflux, a plug hole belch, if you will, where water can be trapped and gurgle, spurt back out, coupled with the biofilm or water from within the trap. And strainers and filters can become areas where biofilm can be established, and non-RAS approved materials, which is a great potential nutrient for biofilm and bacteria. And we've also got these lovely photographs, and if we take a look at the flow straightener and roses in the end of taps, surface area for biofilm to establish. So we've got great areas of here where bacteria can form and live and breed, and that's a particularly nasty one. And over the next few slides, I've shared examples, or the last few slides, I should say, I've shared examples of reservoirs for microorganisms to grow. And there are many more for sure, and this was not an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination, but it just highlights some key locations and key areas. Okay, so we're now going to look at the human factors, and let's think about our reservoir from a human factors perspective, and that being, how has the reservoir of organisms come to be? And these human factors cover all those persons who may have an impact on the water systems. And this could be from a designers and contractors and builders perspective, resulting in poor specification and design, high inherent risk, poor control of contractors and materials, poor control of installation, no awareness of impact on components, and clinical wash basins used as urinals during construction, for example, components that have not been kept sealed and covered, domestic hot water returns not installed to the specification detailed. A recent example of a new build with 150 outlets and none were installed to the specified 300 millimeters. And what are some of the human factors that maintenance and cleaners can introduce? These could be incorrect components being used. This could be poor installation of components, poor storage of materials, or incorrect processes. So we've got some photographs here, which is the strainers are not being cleaned, a build-up of biofilm and bacteria, dirty tools and components being used, contamination from other sources, wash basins used to store dirty mopeds, for example, in contact with the tap end, which is this photograph down here. So we've got direct cross-contamination. What is on the floor is now on the end of the tap. Cleaners taking the cleaning cloth from the waste aperture up to the end of the tap. So there's the sort of origami way of cleaning and folding a cleaning cloth. Very difficult. I can't do it. I'm not even starting to talk to anybody about doing it. But it's the process about how we clean things from top to bottom and how we fold the cloth in a certain way to avoid cross-contamination. And what are some of the human factors that healthcare workers, patients and visitors may introduce? This could be incorrect use of the outlet or no use of the outlet, for example. And this could be also pouring the wrong fluid down a wash basin, drinks, patients, wash water, for example. Not using outlets, patients using the wash basins as urinals. And over the last few slides, I've shared examples of human factors that impact on the reservoir of organisms. There are many more again, and it's not an exhaustive list. Okay, so this almost concludes my presentation, but time to bring home some of the sort of takeaway points. And immunocompromised. Hospitals contain patients who are susceptible to infection. We know this already. Transmission of pathogens between staff and patients and among patients. Patients are exposed to microorganisms via inhalation, aspiration, contact, or ingestion. And the presence of microorganisms in hospital environments. Microorganisms are naturally occurring. We are not going to eliminate them. Combination of favourable conditions exists for their proliferation. Controlling these favourable conditions will reduce the infection potential. And throughout that presentation, I've referenced a lot of data, and I've got a slide here which is referencing those data points. And they go on the report on the burden of endemic healthcare associated infection worldwide. Healthcare associated infections fact sheets, worth taking a note of. And if they're of any use, then please utilise them. But also, I'd just like to refer you to our subscriptions for free blogs. Again, these are educational blogs written by our senior consultants, authorising engineers, on behalf of some of our clients who come to us with requirements and wants and needs to learn new things. Yeah, so those are great little blogs that we try to generate on a 3 per month, I think it is. Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong. To get out in front of people and just to educate the markets and educate people on various things. And we've got academy videos, how to do certain things. I think there's 5 videos on there, and we're also on LinkedIn. We've removed ourselves from Facebook and X because there was the traffic that going through that is minimal compared to the other areas that we've got. So hopefully, thank you for listening. We issue like I said, a blog on a weekly basis, and we've also got various other things to do. And I would just like to thank you guys for paying attention. I am fully aware it's not the sexiest of subjects in the world, but it's something that we do need to get a grip of. And these waterborne pathogens, bugs, bacteria aren't going away in the near future or anytime soon. And it's just about controlling them and manage them and making sure we keep everybody as safe as practically possible. I would like to thank everybody, and I should hand back.
Hello,
any questions? Oh.
Sorry, Pete, I was just going to say thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions?
Sarah Morley, do we have any questions in the chat?
We've just had one that's just come in from Scott Stewart. Can you see that, Pete, in the Q&A? In terms of splash risk, what would you take on the installation of a sink that a GP practice has requested? Can you see that, Pete?
No, I can't, but bear with. And we'll try it. We'll stop sharing.
If you look at the chat, it's not actually in the Q&A, it's in the chat.
Okay.
I'll let you answer that, but we do have a blog on clinical wash hand basin, so I will pop the link to that in the chat for Scott.
Perfect. So I suppose one of the key points today is if we're not in the healthcare association with GP practices, every facility that provides water to the public or to staff has got a duty of care to perform a Legionella risk assessment to assess the risk, again because this is a cost requirement. And obviously we've got legislation in place from the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, Management Health and Safety at Work Regulation 1999, and all of the supporting legislative statute documentation. The risk associated to it is relatively low. So from a risk perspective, what's the likelihood of probability times a consequence? The likelihood of probability of contracting Legionella disease is relatively low. Okay, but the consequence is got a 12% mortality rate, so the consequence is quite high. And as long as we do the basic things like have a Legionella risk assessment, a written scheme, a process to manage it, make sure we manage it according to the guidelines and the approved code of practice, which is a quasi-legal document, and then the HSG 274 documentation, which is supporting it. Do we conform to that table 2? Are we doing the monthly temperatures? Are we flushing infrequently used outlets? Are we doing X, Y, and Z? If we can say we're doing all of those things, keep records of them, and we prove that the control is there, then we're doing our job. It's relatively simple, easy to say, more difficult to do. And it's not, this isn't a scaremongering sort of course or session. This is just to say there are things that we can do to manage our systems. And as long as we've got records, keeping records, and we can prove that we've got good control of it, then we are doing our job as best as possible.
Can you see the next one, Pete, from Maria?
No, I can't see the chat, Sarah. Just read them out for me.
Right,
Please.
okay. The next one, Maria has asked, is the contamination risk of mixing water to a nice temperature the reason why separate taps for hot and cold are so popular in England?
Yeah, okay, good question. Great question. So hot and cold, yes, that is correct. But also, the reason why we have basins is for mixing temperatures, so mixing the hot and the cold. For some reason, over time, we've got lazy and we just wash our hands underneath the tap. But historically, we use basins to wash. So we use basins to mix the water. So we didn't have any scald potential because we were just putting it into the basin with a plug and then washing our hands and washing our whatever else. But yeah, that's one of the reasons. TMVs, thermostatic mixing valves, have increased the risk for potential for waterborne pathogens because of the number of strainers, filters, rubber seals, rubber O-rings, etc., which is an organic food source for bugs. They've increased the risk massively, but we've got lazy over time. So yeah, good spot, good question.
Yeah, I've just put the TMV blog on there for you, Maria. Hopefully you can see that. And the next question we've got is another one. It's from Steve. Is there a risk of splashes on wall surfaces?
On a wall?
On a wall surface.
WALL?
Yep. Yep, a wall. I'm not quite sure what that's a. If you can elaborate a little bit more, Steve, we might be able to give you an answer to that question.
It's bacterial gathering on walls.
Sorry, Steve, you're very quiet then. Say that again.
Bacterial gathering on walls.
Bacterial gathering on walls. So I guess the risk of water splashing on walls and the bacteria there.
Okay, great question. There's obviously we've all heard about the mold issues over the recent years with tenancy agreements, etc. However, so Pseudomonas aeruginosa is pretty much everywhere, and it's contaminating. It's contaminated surfaces, so it could increase the risk, I guess, from if the water is contaminated with Pseudomonas, then obviously that wall could be contaminated with the Pseudomonas again, and then that could be transferred further on. But Pseudomonas aeruginosa is a particularly nasty bug because it can be found on general skin surfaces and doesn't have to be in the wetted environment.
Thanks, Pete. Next one, Pete, we've got one from Stuart McMinn. Is there any evidence of elderly contracting Legionella in the home?
Oh, that's another great question. So the UK tend to not test people as readily as other countries such as the Netherlands. So the Netherlands had a big outbreak in 2012, and they started to incorporate Legionella disease testing with anybody who comes into a GP practice or the NHS or hospital environment with flu-like symptoms. They were automatically tested for Legionella disease, and as per Chris Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance, the more they test, the more they find. They found more positive results. And one of the things that I often discuss is when people buy a house, we buy the house according to our situation. So if we've got 2 or 3 children, for example, we've got a family of 5 living in a house, and those 3 children decide to fly the nest, we've got a house that's suited for 5 people, but only 2 people in there potentially, which means that we've got probably a poor turnover in certain locations. And a question to everybody would be, does everybody use every single outlet every single week within their domestic property? Have we all got an outside bip tap that we flush on a weekly basis? Do we use that outdoor tap every week? There are certain areas where contamination can occur within a domestic dwelling, but that is a great question. I think from my side of things, that needs a little bit more research.
Thanks,
to prove
Pete.
that.
Stuart's also asked another question. How long before bacteria becomes an issue in a new shower head if not used?
Weekly.
I'm just about to post actually the Academy video that we have for flushing little used outlets.
Yeah, okay. So the growth rate of Legionella bacteria in perfect conditions, in laboratory conditions, is every 2 hours. So it doubles. So that bacteria, through cell division, meiosis, mitosis, doubles every 2 hours in perfect conditions. So if we've got 100 colony forming units per litre, in the space of 2 hours, we've got 200. Another 2 hours, we've got 400. Another 2 hours, we've got 800. So it's exponential growth. And if in domestic systems, it's every 12 hours. In every cooling systems, it's every 6 hours. So every 12 hours, it doubles. So therefore, there is a significant potential for it to grow relatively quickly. And that's why we encourage that weekly usage of an infrequently used outlet.
Okay, with another question here. In your experience, what is the ideal period or time lifespan to change TMVs?
Oh, to change them or to service
Change them.
Okay, so they have to be checked on a 6-monthly basis for the fail-safe check, which means that they're working correctly to avoid scalding. They have to be serviced according to the manufacturer's guidelines, which is often every 12 months. So every 12 months they need to be serviced according to the manufacturer's guidelines, and that means stripped down, disinfected, descaled, and put back together. And obviously during that time you do the fail-safe check as well to make sure it's working accurately. From a replacement perspective, I would probably go with as and when the service provider suggests that they are perished in any way, shape or form. I don't think from the top of my head that there is a changeover period. I think it's when it's deemed to be non-functioning or damaged. Is that okay?
Brilliant. Yep. Sounds good. Thanks, Pete. Just having a look now. So Joanne Walters has said hands should be washed under clean running water. Mixing the water is purely for comfort reasons. As for splashing to walls, risk would be dependent on whether the water splash contaminates equipment that will be used in a care intervention. So it's not a question. She's just reiterating what you said earlier, Pete. And I think that's it, unless anybody else has any other questions. Hang on, we've got some...
with their hands up, if I just unmute them, is that okay?
Yes,
Yeah,
certainly, go for it. Hi, Stuart, can you hear us?
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, we
Yes.
can hear you. Yeah, loud and clear.
Oh, yeah. I'm a building surveyor, so I deal with disabled facilities grants in a local authority. So it's something that we're very conscious of. Sometimes, you know, we put in level access showers for people, and you've answered me questions absolutely brilliant about, you know, we don't test in this country for that type of thing. And I remember a manager saying to me that basically, you know, I was almost like talking rubbish about Legionella developing in a shower head, and how long would it take? And that's only through past experience of talking to building services engineers. And just to reiterate to everybody, I used to work for Cumbria County Council, and it was at the time when Barrow-in-Furness had the outbreak. And it's extremely important. I mean, that was an air conditioning plant that should have never been in operation. And it was my colleague who highlighted it should have been shut down many years before, and the local authority decided to bury their head in the sand. And consequently, those people that passed away needn't have passed away. I myself used to walk underneath that air conditioning air vent, including my family, my mother, my father, my son, my sister and my brother. So it's extremely important that people take this on board. And if I was to say to you that my building services engineer was an expert witness for the Crown on that, and he was taken to one side by the health and safety executive and asked to bring his report to the table, because they'd showed him a report that had the conclusion cut off. So he became an expert witness to the Crown. So I've got experience of, you know, mismanagement and also, you know, experience of Legionella. So I'm very conscious of it, and I will endeavour to try and keep as many people safe in the future. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. And yeah, tough times in Barrow. I as I mentioned, I looked after cooling towers at Vickers Shipbuilding Yard, and I was under investigation. I was a service chemist, and I had the HSE investigators harassing me and my site contacts. And yeah, it was a very, very, very difficult time. And unfortunately, there is a court narrative on the on Barrow Council itself and members within the Barrow Council, and it's not good reading, if I'm honest.
No, they went for the wrong person, unfortunately.
They did.
They should have gone.
Correct.
Should have gone for corporate manslaughter, because they wanted to save money, and it's exactly the same thing that's happened to Grenfell. The saving of money has cost lives.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Gillian took the rap, and I don't think she was necessarily the right person for that.
Yeah, that's correct. I do. She actually I used to do regeneration schemes at Barrow, so I do know Gillian. So yeah, shame it happened. Yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anything else, Laura or Sarah?
I think there's one more question that's come up in the chat.
I was talking away then and realised I put myself on mute. My apologies. Pete, we've got a couple of other questions. One is from Maria in Swansea. How often should clinical or non-clinical areas have water testing or checks for contamination? I have put in there the blog on TVC testing and when you should do it. But if you wanted to elaborate on that one, Pete.
Yeah, sure. So HTML 401 is advising that we should do 6 monthly Pseudomonas aeruginosa in augmented care, or and as we've just already found out, that augmented care, there's no fixed definition for it, but it is for invasive, whether it be catheters, whatever it is. Yeah, so 6 monthly, and from non-clinical, if we are controlling non-clinical areas, you're talking about non-clinical or non-NHS there. So non-NHS or care facilities have got a HTML 401 compliance. So if we could send that blog through as well, Sarah.
Yeah, sure, will do. Yeah.
And then from a non-NHS, there is no requirement to take samples, and if we are controlling it through temperature and adequately controlling it through temperature. So the care side of it has got their own recommendations. Non-care, they don't have to, but it's good practice to do so that you can prove that whatever controls you are implementing are controlling it. But from a non-NHS, non-care, it's deemed as being adequate enough to just go through the process of managing it without having to come forward to confirm that it is not present. But as I said, it's good practice to do so. Does that make sense?
Maria, I'm just putting a link to a blog that actually explains the HTMO 401. Hopefully that will be of use. Pete, we've got another question here from Olusgan. Do we have any data on the rate of infection of Legionella as per seasons, i.e. is the infection rate in the summer the same as winter? And I have added a blog there that talks about the increased risk of Legionella during the summer months. If you again wanted to elaborate a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. After years and years and years of analysis, and the risk increases during the summer months because of the ambient temperature. The heat gain potentially within locations where water is stored can increase considerably. So if anybody had cold water storage tank at their own dwelling, it was often in the loft. And what happens in the summer months during the loft, it warms up. And often there's lots and lots of locations where tanks are in high up spaces, heat rises, and the temperature increases. And we go away on holidays. We have summer shutdowns. We have X, Y, and Zs that occur in the summer months. And obviously that incoming water is higher, and there is a greater potential, there's a greater risk in the summer months than in the winter months. Absolutely.
Thank you, Pete. Next question is from John Linklater. Is there a quick test for Cryptosporidium in private water supplies?
That is a question I do not know. A quick test for crypto. We can take a look at that one for you.
Yeah, I'm making a note of all of these questions. So if there's any that we can't answer, then we can always come back to you. John, if you're happy for Rosemary to share your email with us, then we can look into that and answer that for you.
I think I might have to get in touch with United Utilities, because that was, I think if I remember right, that was the crypto outbreak in pre-COVID.
Okay.
I think Thames Water have had a crypto issue recently. I don't know. I'd have to come back to you on that.
We'll get back to you. We'll get back to you on that one. Okay, a question here from William McGee. Is SHTMO 401 mirroring the testing regime at 6 months? That's the Scottish version, isn't it?
Yes, I believe it does. I believe so, but can I just check that for you? There are some slight differences with the SHTM. I'd have to double check.
Making a note of the ones that we are going to follow up on. Okay, I think, let me just double check, because there's some coming in on the chat and there's some coming in on the question and answers. So let me just make sure I've covered everybody. Here's another one. William says, great, thanks, Pete. Happy to scan through the SHTM myself.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So unless I've missed anybody, I think we have answered everybody. Rosemary and Lauren, you can't see anybody that I've missed. Please do shout if I have.
No, I think that you've covered all the questions there. Thank you ever so much for your time, both today, Sarah and Pete. That's very helpful. Thank you
Oh, you're
for
welcome.
everyone who joined us this morning. Just to remind you that the session has been recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel soon, which can be shared with your colleagues. With that, I'll wrap up. Thank you again for your time, and we'll hopefully see you online on our next webinar.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming along.
Okay.